Hello everyone, welcome. My name is Enzo. I'm a student at INSEAD for the MBA from INSEAD. I will be introducing now our third block of the conference called Exploring Brazil's Unique Nature Potential. We'll begin our discussion with a panel doing a deep dive on how Brazil can create a more sustainable and resilient agricultural system. I think that all of you know the relevance that Brazil's agribusiness has for both our country and the world. We have over 1 billion people relying on our food for sustenance and nourishment. And I think that, as all you know, like consumers, investors, regulators are constantly asking for more traceability, more environmental and social safeguards. And I think that Brazil has a unique fit and a unique potential to set the discussion in the right direction. So I'm happy to introduce our panelists to show to you how we can develop and export low carbon technologies and collaborate with other countries in this discussion. For this discussion, I will call to the stage Caroline Bouquet, Investment Director at Mirova. I will also call Roberto Waack, Board Member at Marfrig. Unfortunately, we had a last-minute cancellation with José Pugas, but I'm certain that our panelists here will do a great job, and we have a really good discussion either way. Finally, to moderate, I would like to call to the stage Patrícia, Managing Partner at Systemiq LATAM, co-founder of AI Earth Partners and AI Institute. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to thank you for organizing this, Jorge, Luisa, and other organizers of the Brazil Climate Summit. It's really beautiful to see how our community that's fostering a net zero economy is growing and that we are taking our message to the world. I agree with Luciana that it's time also for us to show, all the business and the good management and good examples that we have in Brazil, so that we also understand that there is a unique chance for us to work together in making this transition to a net zero economy to happen, not only in Europe, but all over the world. So just to remember, George has just told me that we have almost 70% of the audience here is from here, which was an important goal for us. And let's make sure that also after the meetings we have a chance to connect. It's an honor to be here with you, Caroline, and with you, Roberto, in this panel about sustainable agriculture. Roberto, when we were preparing, already corrected us. He asked us to talk about agriculture and assume that it should be always sustainable. So it was a good provocation for us to change what's happening around the world, especially because now we have the new deforestation-free regulation here in Europe. So we have an important opportunity, but also a challenge for the ones that are not following this model, right, Roberto? So with that, the idea of this session here is to talk about the good agribusiness in Brazil as a great opportunity and as a development driver. We need to remember that in 2022, we achieved 36% of the total exports coming from agriculture, but in 23 it was actually bigger than that. And we keep on growing. So last year we had more than $200 billion, if I'm not wrong, of exports from Brazil being agriculture goods, mainly commodities. It's a sector that increased the productivity quite at a very high level, and it's being seen as a reference around the world. We have a concentration of exports in a few goods that are seen as goods that produce food to the whole world, especially soy, corn, meat, chicken. We also have other goods, but especially these four are the ones that are really concentrating most of the exports of Brazil. We had a few important changes that already were effects of this deforestation-free regulation, and maybe it's part of the critical discussion that we have to have today. If you see what happened in Brazil and was part of the news yesterday, after yesterday, we had a growth of the concentration of our exports to China. So we tripled the exports to China in 2 years. So we are here in Europe exactly to discuss how we can strengthen the negotiations and the agreements between Brazil and Europe, and also to add value to the value chains that we have in the agriculture system in Brazil. So very exciting opportunities, but important challenges to deal with as well. I will direct my first question to you, Roberto, who has such an important experience both in the private sector and the social sector as well. Given that you are now at the board of Marfrig, my question is, can Brazil be a reference in sustainable agriculture, and especially in your case, given your experience, sustainable cattle ranching in the world? And if so, how can companies and institutions help to turn evident the value of our natural capital in Brazil? To finalize, it's a long question, and I need you to answer in 4 minutes. Which competitive advantages make Brazil such a powerhouse that can help feed the world in a sustainable way?
Hi, yeah. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity, Patrícia. Well, in my view, Brazil is already a reference in sustainable agriculture in the world. I have no doubt about that. Well, very impressive figures. 10% of Brazilian GDP comes from the cattle sector. Something like 2.5 million ranchers. Second largest beef, poultry, fourth largest pig exporter, so as Patricia mentioned. So we have the best practices in what concerns animal welfare. Nothing compared to what happens in the Brazilian extensive meat production systems, and the lowest carbon footprint on food production sector. So no comparison with any other country in the world in what concerns carbon emission coming from agriculture, if we take out deforestation. So the point is that we cannot consider the Brazilian system as an homogeneous system. It's completely heterogeneous. So that is the main point. We need to differentiate the different production systems in Brazil. So 30% of Brazilian territory are used by the agribusiness sector. 70% of that comes from cattle. And cattle has the major connection with deforestation. However, this major connection is not really connected to production, is mainly connected to land grabbing. So the situation, the link on the agribusiness sector as a whole is a big mistake. And I think the agribusiness sector in Brazil must consider that and must include that into the whole communication on how to really differentiate the different production systems. Again, we have the most competitive and most sustainable agri-food production in the world, but generally speaking, and if we accept to include all the agribusiness sector at the same can, then it's absolutely impossible to really deal with the differentiation. EUDR, for instance, deals with deforestation. We fully agree with that as a company. And we work with zero deforestation since 2009. But if we take a really strong traceability system, and we need to have that implemented as soon as possible, we should also consider traceability on carbon footprint, not only on deforestation. So, and if we consider the whole system, not only deforestation, again, for us, deforestation free, no doubt, legal or illegal, for Marfrig. But if the game is really deforestation and the relation of deforestation with carbon emissions, then we should talk about carbon as a whole, and then really deal with the carbon traceability as a whole, carbon measurement as a whole, carbon footprint in the agribusiness sector as a whole, but not only carbon. Brazil and the agribusiness sector is responsible for the protection of about 200 million hectares. That's half of Europe. And this protected area is in the hands of the agribusiness sector. So you can imagine something like half of Europe protected by the sector that's nowadays not considered sustainable. There's something wrong with this. If you take the emissions, Brazil is responsible for maybe 2-3% of the global emissions, depends on how you make the calculations. 50% of that comes from deforestation, 25% of that comes from the agribusiness sector. If you make all the figures, I'm not going to all that now, Brazil is responsible for 10% of the food production in the world, and this sector is responsible for less than 7% of the emissions. That means that this sector probably has the lowest level of carbon emission in the food production sector, globally speaking. That's what we need to tackle. So I can talk a little bit more about Marfrig later, but anyway, this is generally the general idea on the need to consider the value of natural capital, not only carbon, natural capital, including water, biodiversity, everything, into the whole agribusiness system that's in the hands of private sector, that's in the hands of the agribusiness sectors nowadays in Brazil. So if we don't take this seriously and if we don't bring this honest conversation to the whole globe in everything concerns to the trade agreements, and that includes China for sure. People say, no, China is not interested. China is completely prepared for all that. And we know we are one of the largest exporters to China. So, of course, we need to be prepared to talk about the value of natural resources, the value of natural capital, and how to really get to the economic value of natural capital as a whole. And then we are maybe talking seriously about sustainability of food production systems.
Thank you, Roberto. So, huge opportunity, but many misunderstandings for us to clarify as well. I will maybe repeat a few things on the introduction, what Roberto said, to throw back a question to you, Caroline, because what we see now happening from an economic development perspective and healthy economy for the case of Brazil in the last few years, I think Brazil is back to the international agenda. The fact that we are having an event like this, with business leaders coming to Europe to present what they are doing together with public sector leaders like Luciana Costa, is really a major advancement. Having said that, what we see in practice in the bilateral agreements is still not ideal for a country like Brazil. Our complexity economic matrix is actually moving towards the wrong direction, if one could say so, because a healthy economy should have a more diverse matrix and add more value to its products, right? So if you see, Brazil is increasing the concentration in one country and also decreasing the value added of the products that are being exported. We had the European Green Deal and the Inflation Reduction Act, Caroline, and I think this would be a unique opportunity for countries in Europe, for example, to negotiate agreements with Brazil in a way that we share the value in each one of those value chains. But that's not happening yet. Given that Mirova is one of the main case examples that we have today, and your works being a reference case also in understanding the value of natural assets, as Roberto said, my question to you is this clear, this advantage, this competitive advantage, or the natural advantage that we have in Brazil and the comparative advantages are being really translated into competitive advantages? What international investors see in Brazil and what we could be doing differently for these opportunities to be seen around the world?
Thank you. Just a few words for those who do not know Mirova. So we are a subsidiary of the French banking group Natixis, dedicated to impact investing. We are a leader in natural capital investing, as we have been active in this sector for more than 10 years now, and we have beyond 700 million USD under management in this sector. We have been active in both developed and developing countries, including Brazil. And we do believe that Brazil has a key role to play in the so-called agroecological transition, and quite a lot of key advantages to play this role. But I will only focus on two important parameters that I would like to highlight. I think the first one is scale. It has already been mentioned previously, but Brazil is a leading player in both the agricultural and forestry sectors. It's one among the world's first exporters in various commodities such as soy, coffee, beef, cotton. It means that there are millions, billions of hectares that need to transition to regenerative agricultural practices with a wide diversity of ecosystems. This also means that you have already companies that have years and years of operations, track records that are well connected to international markets, that are robust, and that could provide good investment cases for institutional investors such as Mirova. So I think the business opportunities are massive in this country, and this is key because when you are an international investor, you are not looking, for small-scale, innovative, experimental projects. What you really want is to be able to deploy capital at scale, so meaning large ticket of investments, and with companies that have already some track record and experience. Scale is important, but the second parameter that is also so key when you want to invest in countries is more like the business ecosystem, the business environment. And I think Luciana has described the macroeconomics of this country. I mean, Brazil is still classified as an emerging country, but at least from our perspective, it's, I would say, in the most developed countries of the emerging countries. And this is really important because when you are financing investments in the sustainable land use sector, you are already taking a lot of risk. You are taking, production risk, especially with weather events and uncertainty, market risk. There is more and more volatility on some commodities, price risk, etc. You need to provide long-term financing. You don't switch to business as usual, to more sustainable practices in 1 year. You need to replant, you need to finance capex, you need to wait at least a few years for some crops to deliver the first harvest. So you are taking also a maturity risk. And to facilitate the investment, you need an ecosystem that will lower, I would say, the transition risk. And here I'm talking about the regulatory framework, the fact that, for instance, you have a strong system to identify land titles, land tenure rights, etc. But also, international lawyering firms, consultants, reputational auditors that will facilitate for an international investor like Mirova, which is not familiar with the Brazil-specific market, the investment. So yeah, I think these are two key advantages of Brazil today for us.
Thank you, Caroline. Important to know that when Caroline mentioned the degraded land, we have more than 80, almost 90 million hectares of degraded land. And in this discussion that we are having G20 now, I see Minister Isabella Teixeira here with us. There are a few dilemmas that are non-dilemmas in the case of Brazil that we should be very concrete and specific about the opportunities. The food versus fuel versus forest should not be a dilemma in Brazil. Rather than that, a big opportunity. And that's why I'd love to hear from you, Roberto Waack, about the experience of Marfrig. Marfrig today is one of the biggest beef producers and exporters in the world. Could you share a little bit with us what Marfrig has been doing as case examples, concrete case examples on, for example, increasing productivity, reduction of carbon and methane emissions, and integration between agriculture and other technologies like reforestation? That will be very interesting to know what a company like Marfrig is doing in practice to turn agriculture in sustainable agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, just before getting to that, I don't want to give the impression that everything is fine in Brazil in what concerns land use. We reduced the deforestation rate by 50%. So now we shot something like 15 trees per second. So we are getting better. We used to have 30 trees chopped or cut per second, and now we have 15. So, of course, we have a huge, enormous problem. And we will never be able to deal with that without really recognizing the value of natural capital. So the thing is, command and control is crucial, no doubt, But command and control is not enough to really change that situation. We are now facing the challenge to really recognize the value of natural capital, recognize the value of an economy based on conservation, and recognize the value of the natural capital that is in the hands of the private sector. So that is something that, generally speaking, we should bring to the world as a challenge on how to really deal with recognition of natural capital. Marfrig has a sales of about $30 billion a year, something like 200,000 employees. So it's one of the largest food production companies in the world. And as I mentioned to you, we have this commitment to zero deforestation for the last 15 years. And one of the most important thing is traceability. Enormous challenge to deal with traceability in a situation like that. So we have still something like 15 trees being cut per second. And the majority of that situation gets into the hands of the beef sector. But again, we need to differentiate, and we need really to differentiate with different technologies. One of them is monitoring, is traceability. So nowadays, 100% of the supply chain of Marfrig is under complete traceability. We have a system based on risk mapping that deals with directly and indirectly supplier using basically satellite images and this type of thing. So we have 5 classes of clusters from very low risk to very high risk. And of course, we don't buy from medium risks. So we only buy from very low and low, which is a problem because the remaining area will be completely excluded. So we need to deal with a social exclusion problem. And if we don't deal with, as a company, the social exclusion problem, of course, we will not deal with the challenge of reducing from 15 to 0 trees per second. So it's a combination of risk mapping technology, using everything, blockchain, blah, 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 with a social inclusion process, trying to bring the different players in the sector. And we have something like 50,000 farmers on our supply chain. And we control something like 30 million hectares, which is the size of UK, in our system, on our monitoring system. We buy something like 5,000 operations per day. So 5,000 operations per day, 100% monitored on satellite at real time, using artificial intelligence, everything you can imagine, to make sure that the cattle will not come from a deforested area. Still, we have problems. It's not 100% under control because, of course, you have transportation. That's why, in our view, bringing the transportation system into the game, combined with the forest code system, which allows, and forest code is an enormous asset for Brazil, and we don't recognize that as a country. So if we combine the forest code, which is the environmental register system, with the transportation system, the animal transportation system, we can have something very extremely powerful in the traceability system. Not only that, of course, we also think that individual system is of major importance in this game. So traceability, very complex, but is absolutely doable. I have no doubt that Brazil has the most advanced traceability system nowadays in the world. But again, we still need to deal with the social thing. And the social front is completely connected to the natural resources, natural capital valuation, recognition of value. That's why we also invest in that area. So reforestation is one of the most interesting fronts that Marfrig is now investing together with Regreen, but also with biomas. And so we are completely connected to that. We are definitely very engaged on pasture land restoration, working with WWF, for instance, in pasture land restoration in the Cerrado area, in the Pantanal area. So this is one of the most important things. 100% monitor of carbon emission, including methane. So maybe this is one thing that we can talk a little bit later. Also big challenge, but it's doable. Nowadays we have the methane and the carbon emission situation approved by SBTi. So this is a crucial thing. And of course, the inclusion of small farmers into that process. So again, recognition of natural capital is a very important process that we are combining with traceability.
Thank you very much, Roberto. Caroline, on your view, what are the concrete case examples of recent technologies that Mirova has invested that made a difference? And if you could connect that to financial instruments, because access to finance can be also a very important instrument, as you said, to scale up the opportunities and technologies, and also to direct the investments towards the right direction in terms of carbon emissions reduction and also alignment with the new rules in Europe. So if you could give examples, that would be very helpful to us as well. Thank you.
Sure. So as you said, well, the challenge we are facing is massive. We know that by the year 250, we'll have to feed more than 9 billion people. At the same time, we already have massive amounts of land that is degraded, and we are degraded every year 12 million hectares more, which is half the size of the UK. So we urgently need to find a way to produce more and better, but with less land. And this means switching to what we call sustainable land use practices or regenerative agriculture. Basically, holistic production systems where you combine production with protection, avoiding soil depletion and preserving biodiversity and the soil health, basically. So within Mirova, we have invested in several so-called agroforestry projects across the world, but including in Brazil. So basically, in agroforestry, you combine on the same plot of land trees with crops or animal production systems. And the interaction between trees and the crops preserve biodiversity, put more soil carbon into the soil, and ultimately brings more resilience to your crops, which is especially important in a context where we have again more and more extreme events happening like El Niño or La Niña. In Latin America, we are partnering with a company which is called Ecotierra, who implements such agroforestry projects with local communities and cooperatives. So basically what they do is that they provide technical assistance to smallholder farmers to allow them to plant what we call shade trees, typically with intercropping with coffee trees. And these trees, that are usually native species, will bring shade and nutrients to the coffee crops, again making them more resilient and ultimately improving the yield on these hectares. This is something really interesting because it also has side benefits. So beyond the intercropping, they will also put a key effort on the protection and regeneration of natural areas, again with native species. And an important element that we see in many projects and that can strengthen the profitability and ultimately attractivity of such investment is the value that will also be given to this protection part. And that's where carbon finance can play, we believe, also an important role. Because basically, in this type of projects, so there is the main revenues coming from the sale and the export of commodities, so in this case, coffee. But there can be also side revenues coming from the carbon credits linked to the restoration and protection activities implemented. And this ultimately means a more balanced revenue profile for the farmers and the local communities. And more financial attractivity for an investor like us, because instead of relying on only the main commodity, you can have side benefits and revenues coming from carbon credits.
Thank you very much, Caroline. We will have a chance now for the final question, final remarks. I think here the goal is to give a realistic view of what's happening in Brazil and in the world, not positive, not negative, just real. Last week for us in Brazil was very important in many ways. I was this Friday with the Planetary Guardians in Brazil, and Johan Rogström shared very important news to us in person. There was the first time that people like Johan, Mary Robson, Richard Branson all got together in Brazil to discuss the emergency that we have. We also have the major disaster that we faced in Rio Grande do Sul. As we are here, we have almost 1 million people displaced and many people having their lives threatened, and we know this is going to happen again. Johan gave us one news that was on one way very bad, but also very good. At least I left more hopeful. First, he said that the 1.5 is still achievable. Having said that, that means that if we want to achieve that, in the next 30 to 40 years, we will have to survive above 1.5 so that we can go back again. Which means that we'll have to also live with a lot of efforts for adaptation in the next 40 years, together with the efforts that we are discussing here on how to move to regenerative agriculture at a higher scale, agroforestry. Last week I was also with the Kayapós in a very remote community in the middle of Pará, and was the longest flight that I had over the Amazon. So we flew more than 2 million hectares. That was more than 2 hours flight from Sinop in the middle of Mato Grosso, where deforestation is decreasing, to the middle of a reserve where there is no deforestation. The landscape changes dramatically. You see on one end crops, and then areas with extensive cattle ranch. You see illegal mining, and then suddenly you get to the forests. And the forest protected by indigenous people. This specific place where I was, there were 5 million hectares, 2,000 people protecting that. It's really insane what we see, and this needs to, we need a common solution that needs to be global. So I took a little bit longer now just to share a little bit of the reality. We have a huge opportunity in our hands, but we need to work together. Now, with the deforestation-free regulation that we have in Europe, we need also to understand what a continental country like Brazil is. When I said the food versus fuel versus forest should not be a dilemma, it's because we already have almost 90 million hectares of degraded land that could produce much more. But we need to understand that the way we design those agreements need to go beyond a deforestation-free regulation. We need to go to the field and design concrete projects. Otherwise, we will be regulating each other for many years, and we will not achieve what Johan left to us on Friday as a call to action for all of us. So, final remarks to you, Roberto, and to you, Caroline, on what we need to do to speed up the scale and the speed of the case examples that you just shared with us.
You know, I think we should do what Ukraine is doing on the value of natural capital. So that seems to be very strange. But we were together in Ukraine after something that was presented in the last COP, which is the digitalization of the natural capital as an alternative to value natural capital. Of course, Ukraine is doing that because of the natural capital losses they have. They are probably the country who has now experienced the second largest losses on natural capital. The first one is in Brazil. So Brazil and Ukraine, they are kind of united for the value of the natural capital. They have the reason, we all know, but they are doing a very interesting approach on measuring the losses of natural capital, therefore measuring the value of natural capital. And that is something that companies like Marfrig, but many companies from the agribusiness sector are also trying to do. And basically is identifying the different components of the natural capital, the fauna, the flora, the microbiota, the soil, the carbon, of course, the water, then translating that information including the genetic capital associated to the natural capital and making that very clear. So digitalization is a very important tool, and this is something that we need to look forward, is how to make tangible the value of natural capital, translating the value of natural capital in something that can be added at the value of the companies. And we need to remember that the accounting system globally are moving to that. So 2 years from now, all the accounting global system will have the space, or it will be mandatory to document the value of capital associated or destroyed by the different companies. So this is a very interesting move on how to advance all the technologies, including the accountability of natural capital, measuring, reporting, monetizing, which is something very tricky, but we can talk that in another occasion. But of course, we need to deal with issues on intellectual property and the justice on the distribution of income related to that, and therefore how can all the systems, the agribusiness systems, but also, as you mentioned, indigenous people and the communities, how they can have access and how they can see and get a tangibility on the value of natural capital. So that is more or less the approach we believe should be led by the private sector on that process. Again, private sector, at least in Brazil, and agribusiness sector, is basically connected to enormous value of natural capital that nowadays are not being captured by the accounting system and the economic system. And that's basically something that we need to do together, not only the Brazilian private sector, but the European private sector, dealing with this process on a completely different way that we are dealing now.
Thank you, Roberto. Final minute, Carolina. Minus 1 minute that we have now.
Yeah, sorry. And I will try to be quick. And I think the regulation is there. I mean, we mentioned EUDR. There are additional European regulations such as CSRD, CSDDs that are pushing for more and more transparency across the supply chains. The consumer's demand is definitely there. So it means that for projects that are able to ensure full traceability and sustainability, there is offtake opportunities, and this is key, obviously. I also think that from an investor point of view, there are investors that are ready to and willing to invest in this sector. To my perspective, what still needs to really grow and to be developed is basically entrepreneurs, companies that are able to implement at scale regenerative agricultural projects and to combine operational robustness with high environmental and social standards. Within Mirova, we like to do a parallel between the development of nature-based solutions and what happened in the renewable energy sector, because we have been investing in renewable energy since 20 years now. And 20 years ago, this sector was really nascent. I mean, it was kind of messy, you know, with a wild bench of operators, not very structured, not very regulated. And now it's a mainstream sector. And there are champions. I think Voltalia was part of a panel this morning. This is a good example of a project operator that has become a champion in this sector. And I think we need more, basically, champions in regenerative agriculture that will demonstrate that there is a strong business case and that there are business models that are working and that really, again, enable to implement at scale the principles that I described before.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Roberto. Thank you, everyone, for joining us here.